They called it an execution, a demonstration of absolute power. A single vial, clear as glass, yet more deadly than any weapon the Dominion had ever created. Xypherin, unavoidable, unstoppable, a death sentence in liquid form. And yet, as the human lifted the vial, inspecting it like a fine drink instead of the poison it was, the air in the chamber changed. Officers stood rigid, waiting for the inevitable collapse, the convulsions, the agony that always followed. But when he downed in one gulp, wiped his mouth, and smirked, everything unraveled. The Dominion had conquered hundreds of worlds, shattered civilizations with ease. But now they were staring at something they had never accounted for. Something that refused to die. Before we start, please, subscribe to the channel by clicking the car button on the top right corner now, and hit the notification bell so you can get amazing daily stories as and when published. Please do comment your views about the story or any topic that you want to get a story on. We'll make it happen. Let's dive in the story. The chamber was cold, the air thick with the scent of metal and sterilized death. Harsh white lights flickered above, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. A deep hum vibrated through the steel walls, the ever-present heartbeat of the Dominion's warship. At the center of the room, bound to a reinforced chair, sat Callum Graves, human, soldier, survivor. His wrists were cuffed to the armrests, his legs shackled to the base. Yet, despite the restraints, he sat comfortably, almost relaxed, as if he were merely lounging in some back alley bar rather than the heart of his enemy's stronghold. His dark, battle-worn flight suit bore the marks of countless engagements, scorch marks, tattered seams, a dried smear of blood on the shoulder. His face, weathered but sharp, carried a smirk that didn't belong in a place like this. Across from him, Admiral Drenvek of the Varkari Dominion loomed like a storm cloud. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the light, the jagged ridges along his elongated skull shifting as he studied the human. Twin amber eyes, reptilian and calculating, narrowed with barely concealed disdain. His mandibles twitched, a subtle tell of irritation. "You understand why you're here, don't you?" Drenvek's voice was a low, measured growl. Callum exhaled through his nose, the smirk never wavering. "Let me guess. Not here for tea and biscuits." A sharp click from the Dominion officers lining the room. A warning. One more misstep, and they'd make sure he regretted it. Drenvek's clawed fingers drummed against the polished surface of the interrogation table. "You are the last survivor of your squadron. The Dominion does not tolerate defiance. Your execution will serve as a message to the rest of your kind." Callum leaned back, testing the give of his restraints. "None. Solid. Of course." "Well," he said, tilting his head. "A message usually works best when the other side actually gets to hear it. Bit of a waste if I die in a soundproof room, don't you think?" Drenvek didn't respond immediately. His gaze flickered to the Dominion officers stationed around the perimeter, each one gripping their weapons with a tension that hadn't been there minutes ago. He could sense it, that unease, that undercurrent of something wrong. This human was too calm, too unworried. He should have been trembling, bargaining, breaking. Instead, he sat there, his expression towing the line between amusement and boredom. Drenvek inhaled slowly. "You are mistaken if you believe this is a negotiation." Callum grinned. "Oh no, Admiral. I know exactly what this is. You're putting on a show. A big, terrifying, Dominion-style look at what happens when you defy a spectacle. But here's the thing." He leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I don't think you've thought this through." Drenvek's mandibles clicked together, sharp. "Explain. You want to scare the rest of humanity? Make them tremble at the mere mention of your name?" Callum raised an eyebrow. "Then you picked the wrong guy to kill." Silence. Drenvek didn't move, but his fingers twitched, a small, involuntary reaction that Callum caught. Think about it, Callum continued. If I drop dead right now, what happens? Nothing. Just another corpse in the dirt, another war casualty, another name no one remembers. His smirk widened. But if something else happens, he let the words hang, savoring the Admiral's barely concealed irritation. Drinvek's glare sharpened. You speak in riddles. If you have something to say, say it. Callum exhaled dramatically. Fine. You really want to put on a show? Then give me a proper death. Make it something people will talk about. Drinvek tilted his head slightly, watching him like one might a venomous creature just before it strikes. You have something in mind? Oh, absolutely, Callum said, eyes glinting. Something that'll leave a real impression. Drinvek studied him for a long moment before he finally waved a hand. An officer approached, placing a sleek vial on the table before stepping back. Callum eyed the liquid inside, nearly colorless, with only the faintest shimmer. Drinvek leaned forward, voice like the slow scrape of a blade. This is Zyphrin, the most potent neurotoxin in the known galaxy. Instantaneous, agonizing, unavoidable. His mandibles shifted into something that might have been a grin. You wish for a spectacle? Let us grant you one. Callum stared at the vial, then at Drinvek. Then he smirked. Perfect, he said, reaching for the vial. Callum turned the vial between his fingers, watching the liquid catch the dim light. The chamber was still, the kind of silence that only existed in places where death was an expectation, not a possibility. The Dominion officers watched, anticipation and unease flickering beneath their rigid discipline. Drinvek sat motionless, eyes locked onto the human, waiting. Callum gave the vial a little swirl. So this is it, huh? Zyphrin, Drinvek repeated, his voice like gravel rolling over steel. One of our most refined creations. It doesn't simply kill, it destroys. Once ingested, it binds to the nervous system. You will feel your muscles seize, your throat close, your organs liquefy from the inside out. Sounds unpleasant, Callum mused. Drinvek's mandibles twitched into something resembling amusement. You wished for a spectacle. You will have it. Callum uncorked the vial, sniffing the contents. A Dominion officer flinched. He grinned. You guys always this jumpy? Drinvek remained still, but the tension in the room thickened. This was not how prisoners were supposed to act. Humans, when faced with imminent death, either begged, raged, or fell silent. This one mocked. Callum raised the vial to eye level. How long did it take to make this stuff? Decades? Centuries? Drinvek's voice was slow, measured. Many generations perfected it. That's so. Callum swirled the liquid again. Must be disappointing then. Drinvek's gaze sharpened. Disappointing? Callum's smirk widened. Yeah. And before anyone could react, he drank it. The chamber exploded with movement. Dominion officers recoiled, some instinctively stepping back as if the poison would leap from his body and infect them all. Others gripped their weapons, unsure if they should be relieved or terrified. Drinvek sat frozen, claws tightening against the armrest of his chair. Callum smacked his lips, rolling his shoulders like he'd just finished sipping a cheap beer. Not bad, he said, setting the empty vial down. A little bitter. Kind of burns on the way down. No one spoke. Drinvek's voice, when it came, was a slow, controlled whisper. You should be dead. Callum exhaled. Yeah, I got that impression. He tapped his chest. But what do you know? Still kicking. A younger Dominion officer shifted uneasily. This is impossible. Callum shrugged. I get that a lot. Drinvek's mind raced. No species, no creature in all recorded history had survived Zyphrin. It had been engineered to bypass all possible biological defenses. And yet, this human sat before him, not just alive but unaffected. This was wrong. Drinvek leaned forward, voice sharp. Is this a trick? Some form of human augmentation? Callum leaned in too, mirroring him. Wouldn't you like to know? Silence stretched. Drinvek's breathing was steady, but his eyes burned with calculation. If this human was immune, He gestured. Another vial was produced, this one twice the size, its liquid thicker, darker. A Dominion officer hesitated. "Admiral, this dose, do it." The vial was placed before Callum. The air in the chamber tightened, like the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. Callum lifted the vial, inspecting it. "All right, now we're getting somewhere." "Triple strength," Drinvex said, watching him like a predator sizing up prey that refused to run. "This will burn through even the strongest Varkari in under 10 seconds. There will be no recovery. No delay." Callum exhaled. "I like a challenge." And he downed it. A Dominion officer cursed in his native tongue. Another clenched their weapon. The guards looked at Drinvek, waiting for his order, waiting for the fall. But it never came. 5 seconds. 10. Callum stretched, cracking his neck. "All right, now that one's got a bit more bite." Drinvek's mandibles clenched. This was not possible. Callum tapped his chest again. "Still here. Guess it's not as unavoidable as you thought, huh?" Drinvek's claws curled against the table. His entire world was shifting. The certainty of power, the foundation of their dominion, it was fracturing. Callum leaned forward, voice casual. "Got anything stronger?" Drinvek's claws dug into the armrests of his chair, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The human sat there, relaxed, smirking alive. Zypherin, triple-strength Zypherin, had done nothing. This was beyond anomaly. This was wrong. The chamber was filled with an uneasy silence, thick enough to choke on. Dominion officers exchanged uncertain glances, their rigid discipline cracking beneath the weight of what they had just witnessed. No one dared to speak. No one knew what to say. Callum, on the other hand, was enjoying himself. He drummed his fingers against the table, completely at ease. "You know," he said, leaning back, "I was half expecting to feel something. A little tingle, maybe? A bit of dizziness? But nope, not even a stomachache." A Dominion officer near the back took an involuntary step backward, as if the human might suddenly mutate into something monstrous. Another reached for his weapon, knuckles pale. Drinvek noticed it all. He could feel the shift, the ripple of fear running through his ranks. Unacceptable. He straightened, his mandibles clicking together sharply. "You will explain this." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Explain what?" "Do not play games with me, human." Drinvek's voice was cold, controlled, but there was an edge to it, a crack beneath the surface. "No species can resist Zypherin. None. What trickery is this?" Callum exhaled, stretching his arms. "Trickery? Oh, Admiral, I promise you, this is just good old-fashioned human resilience." Drinvek narrowed his eyes. "Resilience?" Callum nodded. "Yeah. See, we've been poisoning ourselves for centuries." He grinned at Drinvek's visible confusion. "Not on purpose, mind you." "Well, sometimes on purpose. Humans have a complicated relationship with toxins. Our ancestors figured out pretty early on that nature wasn't exactly our friend. Deadly plants, venomous creatures, spoiled food. We had two choices, adapt or die." Drinvek said nothing, but his claws flexed. "So we adapted," Callum continued, shrugging. "We built up tolerances. Some of us even started drinking poison on purpose, a little at a time, just to see if we could get away with it. Turns out we could. And over generations, our bodies got good at handling the nasty stuff." He gestured to the empty vials. "So, really, I should be thanking you. That was the smoothest thing I've had in weeks." A Dominion officer made a noise, half choked, half disbelieving. Another one took another step away. Drinvek saw it, felt it. The room wasn't just shocked anymore. It was afraid. His men, his soldiers, were looking at this human as if he were something else. Something that defied logic. Unacceptable. Drinvek inhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain composed. "You expect me to believe that your species has evolved beyond the reach of our greatest weapon?" Callum smirked. "I don't expect you to believe anything. I just expect you to start realizing that the way you've been looking at humanity, It's wrong. Drinvek's mandibles twitched. Explain. Callum leaned forward. You lot think you have us figured out. Small, weak, squishy little creatures with no claws, no fangs, no natural defenses. Easy to conquer, easy to break. That's what you thought, right? Drinvek didn't answer. He didn't need to. Yeah. Callum chuckled. See, that's your mistake. You're looking at us like we're just another species to be cataloged. Another civilization to be processed. You see weaknesses, but you don't see the pattern. Drinvek's eyes narrowed. And what pattern is that? Callum's smile faded just a little. Just enough to reveal something underneath. Something colder. We survive, he said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy, solid, undeniable. Drinvek felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. He had never known fear. Not truly. He had crushed rebellions, executed warlords, burned entire civilizations to ash. Fear was an emotion for lesser beings. And yet, Callum tilted his head. You ever hear about the Siege of Earth? Drinvek stiffened. He had. The reports were scattered, filled with contradictions, inconsistencies. But the outcome was clear. Earth did not fall. The coalition that had tried to blockade the planet, to starve humanity into surrender, had ceased to exist. Callum saw the flicker of recognition in the Admiral's eyes. He smiled. Yeah, he said. We don't go down easy. Silence. Drinvek exhaled, slow and controlled. His mind was already recalculating. If humanity could not be broken through their most reliable weapon, then war would be costlier than anticipated, and that meant adjustments needed to be made. But he would not show weakness. He straightened, his voice regaining its iron edge. You assume this changes everything. Callum grinned. Oh, I know it does. Drinvek's claws tapped against the cold metal of the table, slow and deliberate, the rhythmic clicking the only sound in the tense chamber. His soldiers remained still, but their breathing had changed, shallow, controlled, uneasy. They had just witnessed something that shattered a fundamental truth of their existence. Zypherin did not fail. Zypherin did not have exceptions. And yet, the human still sat there, smirking alive. Callum exhaled, stretching his arms behind his head, as if he were lounging in a cheap diner instead of the heart of an execution chamber. So, he said, flashing that damnable grin. What now, Admiral? You gonna keep feeding me drinks? Or are we finally gonna have a real conversation? Drinvek's mandibles clicked together sharply. His mind was a battlefield of calculations, contingencies shattering and reforming at lightning speed. You are still a prisoner, he said. You do not dictate the terms of this engagement. Callum chuckled. Engagement? Admiral, we're just two guys having a chat over drinks. You pour, I sip, everyone loses their minds. Pretty solid evening so far. A low growl rumbled in Drinvek's throat. His patience was thinning. You find this amusing? Callum shrugged. I find it interesting. See, I was brought in here to be made an example of. A warning, right? But now... He gestured vaguely around the room. Now your soldiers are looking at me differently. You feel that. That shift. Drinvek did. He had felt at the moment the second vial failed to take effect. It was like a fracture running through the very foundation of the Dominion's power structure. Fear. Not from the human. From his own men. One of his officers, younger, less disciplined, finally cracked. General, the officer muttered. If they are immune, if more of them are like this. Drinvek's head snapped toward him. Silence. The officer shut his mouth immediately, but the damage was done. The words had been spoken aloud, and now they existed in the minds of everyone present. Callum grinned wider. Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? How many more of us can do this? How many of us can just sit here, drink your fancy poison, and walk it off? Drinvek's claws tightened against the metal. You are attempting to instill doubt. It will not work. Won't it? Callum leaned forward, lowering his voice to a near whisper. Because from where I'm sitting, you're rethinking everything. You're wondering, what else have we been wrong about? Drinvek forced himself to remain composed. He needed control, needed to reassert dominance. The Dominion does not rely on a single weapon, he said, voice measured, steady. We have many means of subjugation. Callum tilted his head. That a fancy way of saying you're thinking about a blockade? Drinvek's mandibles twitched. Callum clicked his tongue. Yeah, thought so. He sat back, casual, completely at ease. Let's say you do that. You cut us off, starve our colonies, shut down our supply lines. What do you think happens next? Drinvek narrowed his eyes. You've capitulate. Callum barked out a laugh. See, that's where you're wrong. You think we break easy. You think if you squeeze hard enough, we'll fold. You assume. Drinvek's claws drummed against the table. And what do you assume, human? Callum's grin faded, just slightly, replaced by something colder. I don't assume, he said quietly. I know. Drinvek studied him, searching for weakness. He found none. You speak as if this has happened before. Callum's eyes darkened. Because it has. Drinvek's mind flashed to the reports. The siege of Earth. The one Dominion intelligence had always dismissed as exaggeration. Your people survived that, he said slowly. Callum nodded. And if we did it once, we'll do it again. Only this time, we won't just survive. He leaned in, voice low, sharp as a blade. We'll win. Drinvek didn't respond immediately. His mind was too busy racing through the implications. This was not an enemy that broke. This was an enemy that adapted. This was not how the Dominion had planned for things to go. Callum saw it in his expression. He exhaled, shaking his head. You want to keep pushing this, be my guest. But it won't end the way you think it will. Drinvek straightened. You believe this changes everything. Callum met his gaze, unwavering. I know it does. Drinvek sat motionless, his mind a storm of calculations. The chamber was quiet, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't the weight of authority holding his officers in check anymore. It was something far worse. Doubt. He could feel it creeping through the room like a virus, infecting every officer present. The unthinkable had happened. The foundation of the Dominion's power had been questioned. Callum noticed it, too. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers lazily on the metal table, his smirk never fading. You know, he said, I really expected a little more out of you guys. Maybe a follow-up act? Some big, dramatic speech about how this doesn't change anything. He gestured around the room. But I gotta be honest, Admiral. I think you know it does. Drinvek inhaled slowly through his mandibles, forcing himself to remain composed. This was still his room, his ship. He could order this human's execution with a single word. And yet, killing him now wouldn't erase what had just happened. Wouldn't erase what his men had seen. You are arrogant, Drinvek said finally. And you are mistaken if you believe this conversation has spared your kind from what is coming. Callum nodded. Oh, don't get me wrong. I know you've got backup plans. Fleets, planetary blockades, all the nasty little tricks you guys have used on other civilizations before. He folded his arms. But that's the thing, isn't it? Drinvek's eyes narrowed. Callum tilted his head. You keep assuming we're just like everyone else you've conquered. Drinvek remained silent. Yeah, Callum chuckled. That's your real problem, Admiral. You don't actually understand humans. You think we're just another empire, another species to be processed. But we don't play by your rules. Drinvek's claws tapped the table once. A deliberate, sharp sound. And what are your rules, human? Callum leaned forward, resting his elbows on the metal surface. His smirk faded just slightly, replaced by something colder. We don't break the way you expect us to, he said. We don't fall in line just because someone bigger tells us to. And when someone backs us into a corner, he exhaled slowly, shaking his head. That's when we get real creative. Drinvek's mandibles tightened. You expect me to believe that your species is truly prepared for war with the Dominion? Callum chuckled. Admiral, we've been at war since the moment we figured out how to sharpen a rock. Drinvek's fingers curled against the metal of the table. His officers were watching, listening. Too closely. He could feel the weight of their thoughts, their shifting uncertainty. "This is not the same," Drenvek said, his voice colder. "You are outmatched, outgunned, outnumbered. The Dominion does not suffer rebellion." Callum smirked. Funny thing about rebellions. They don't usually start because people think they can win. They start because people have nothing left to lose. Drenvek studied him, his claws flexing against the surface. He had seen resistance before. He had crushed resistance before. But this was different. This wasn't some desperate plea. This was a promise. The realization settled in like a heavy stone in his gut. This war, if it happened, would not be clean. It would drag. It would burn. It would turn into something the Dominion had never truly encountered before. A war of attrition. And the human was right. The Dominion was built on efficiency, on certainty. A prolonged, unpredictable war with a species that refused to play by the rules? That was dangerous. Drenvek exhaled slowly, then leaned back in his chair. His eyes remained locked on Callum, studying every detail, every micro-expression. "You assume this conversation has changed my decision," he said finally. Callum's grin returned. "Oh, I know it has." Drenvek's mandibles twitched. The human's confidence was infuriating. But the worst part? He wasn't wrong. Drenvek's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair in slow, deliberate beats. His officers remained silent, standing rigid, though their body language betrayed them. Stiff shoulders, shifting gazes, the occasional flick of mandibles in unease. They had walked into this chamber expecting an execution, a display of Dominion authority. Instead, they had witnessed something impossible. The human still sat there, completely at ease, arms folded, watching Drenvek with an infuriating mix of amusement and patience. Callum wasn't just surviving this encounter. He was winning. Drenvek inhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain composed. "You believe this changes everything." Callum chuckled. "I think we've established that I don't just believe things, Admiral." "I know." Drenvek's claws tightened, but he forced his voice to remain even. "Your survival here is an anomaly. An irritation, nothing more. Do not mistake it for a shift in power." Callum leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Sure, keep telling yourself that." Drenvek's mandibles clicked, irritation creeping into his tone. "You assume the Dominion cannot adapt. You assume we do not have contingencies for when things do not go as planned." Callum raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I'm sure you've got contingencies. That's kind of the problem, though, isn't it? You're too structured, too dependent on everything going exactly the way you calculated." Drenvek narrowed his eyes. "Explain." Callum gestured around the chamber. "Your empire works because it's predictable. You expand, you conquer, you set up your little order. Everyone who fights back, you either crush or control. It's a neat, tidy little system." He tilted his head. "Except we both know humanity doesn't fit in neat little boxes." Drenvek exhaled through his nose. "You claim unpredictability as a strength." Callum grinned. "Oh, absolutely. You can't plan for what you don't understand, Admiral. And let's be real, you don't understand us." Drenvek's eyes darkened. "You overestimate yourselves." Callum chuckled. "You sure about that? 'Cause from where I'm sitting, your men are starting to wonder." Drenvek stiffened. Callum wasn't wrong. His officers weren't just watching anymore. They were questioning. He could feel it in the air, the subtle hesitation, the silent reevaluations. They had seen the impossible tonight. And once a soldier questions the certainty of his weapon, doubt spreads like a disease. Drenvek clenched his jaw. "This changes nothing." Callum smirked. "Right. And that's why your claws are digging into the chair right now." Drenvek stilled. Then, deliberately, he flexed his fingers, releasing the metal. He would not allow this human to dictate the rhythm of this conversation. Callum leaned back again, casual, unshaken. "Look, Admiral, I get it. You don't want to admit that you're up against something new. That's fine. But let's be honest. If we go to war, you're not just fighting a species. You're fighting a mentality. Drenvek's gaze flickered. And what mentality is that? Callum's smile faded slightly, his voice dropping lower. We don't stop. The words landed like a hammer against steel. Drenvek studied him, searching for hesitation. He found none. You assume we cannot break you, Drenvek said finally. Callum exhaled. I don't assume. Silence stretched between them. Heavy, unyielding. For the first time in a very long time, Drenvek didn't know what to say. Drenvek remained silent for a long moment, his mandibles tightening, his mind racing through calculations that no longer seemed reliable. The weight of uncertainty pressed against him like an unseen force, something he had never truly felt before. His soldiers still stood at attention, but their expressions betrayed them. They weren't looking at the human as prey anymore. They were looking at him as something far worse, an unknown. Callum let the silence stretch, completely at ease, watching the Admiral with that same infuriating smirk. But there was something behind it now. Something measured. He wasn't just enjoying the moment. He was waiting. Drenvek finally exhaled, slow and controlled. You expect me to abandon our expansion, to retreat. Callum chuckled. I didn't say that. I just expect you to do some basic math. He tilted his head. Think about what happens if you push forward with this war. Really think about it. How long do you think it'll take? How many planets? How many bodies? Drenvek's claws drummed against the table again, but slower this time. Callum leaned in, voice lowering just slightly. You see, you're used to winning fast. You come in, overwhelm the locals, establish order, move on to the next. But with us, he shook his head. That's not how this is going to go. Drenvek narrowed his eyes. And why is that? Callum's smirk faded, and for the first time, his expression was completely serious. Because we don't care how long it takes. You might beat us in the short term, sure. Maybe you take a few worlds, wipe out a few million. But we'll keep coming, over and over. Every city you burn, every colony you blockade, every soldier you execute, it just makes us fight harder. Drenvek's mandibles twitched. He had heard these kinds of speeches before. The last words of desperate species clinging to false hope. But this felt different. It wasn't desperation. It was certainty. Callum's fingers tapped against the table. And the worst part? You won't even realize when you've lost. Drenvek's eyes darkened. Explain. Callum smiled, but it wasn't a grin this time. It was cold. You don't lose when your fleets fall. You don't lose when your warlords die. You lose the moment your people start asking if it's worth it. He gestured slightly toward the officers behind Drenvek. You feel it already, don't you? Drenvek didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew what Callum was implying. He had seen the hesitation, the subtle shifts in posture, the unspoken questions. His soldiers had walked into this room believing in certainty. Now, they weren't so sure. That was how rebellion started. Drenvek inhaled sharply, tapping his claws once more before steepling his fingers. You propose an alternative. Callum leaned back again, casual, like he'd been waiting for this moment. I propose you start thinking smarter. You want stability? Control? Maybe stop trying to fight the one species in this galaxy too damn stubborn to die properly. Drenvek exhaled through his nose, deep and slow. He hated everything about this conversation. He hated that he was even considering what the human was saying. But logic screamed at him from the depths of his mind. This war would not be clean. It would not be controlled. And if the Dominion was forced into a prolonged war, if it drained their resources, fractured their unity, that was how empires collapsed. Drenvek's claws curled slightly before he pressed a button on the armrest of his chair. The chamber doors unlocked with a quiet hiss. The guard stiffened but did not act. Drenvek met Callum's gaze, his voice low. The Dominion does not retreat. We do not surrender. Callum smirked again. Didn't ask you to. Drenvek exhaled slowly. But we are not fools. If you believe cooperation is a more efficient path than war, then prove it. Callum stood, rolling his shoulders. Now you're talking. Drinvek remained seated, watching him with calculating eyes. Understand this, human. If this is deception, if your kind shows weakness, he leaned forward, voice like steel. The Dominion does not make the same mistake twice. Callum turned as he walked toward the doors. Neither do we. The chamber was silent as he left. Drinvek stared at the empty vial on the table. For the first time in his career, he wondered if the Dominion had finally met something it could not conquer. Here is the story ends. If you enjoyed and want to watch more thrilling sci-fi adventures, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Dive into epic battles, explore distant galaxies, and join brave heroes as they fight for survival against impossible odds. Let us know in comments if you want next chapters to publish soon. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and become part of the journey. Together, we'll keep the last light burning. Subscribe now and let the adventure continue.